Hello, Simon. Welcome to Getting There with Amy Claire. How are you?
Yeah, very well, Amy. You?
I'm fabulous, to be honest, actually, yeah, which is nice. So Simon, as I say, welcome to the show, and today we're going to be talking about all sorts. But just so the listeners have an idea, do you mind just introducing yourself? Just a quick kind of background.
Yeah, sure. My name is Simon McCarthy. I'm just turned 30, going into my 30s now, which is, how to say, a bit, I don't know, am I going through, have I passed my quarter life crisis and I'm now waiting for my midlife one? But yeah, just turned 30 back in September. So kind of bit of a background about myself. So born and raised in Cork City.
Woo, represent.
Representing. Yeah, born and raised in Cork City. I grew up on the south side of Cork City in Passage West. Went to primary school and secondary school there. Then went to UCC for 2 years. Thought that I could bluff my way through a degree in biological and chemical sciences, which wasn't the case. Make sure you study. So took a year out. Then worked in my the company where my father worked, and quickly realized I need to go and get a degree and sort my life out basically. So went back, did 4 years of business information systems in UCC, graduated there in 2015, and really wanted to go into academia. So kind of on and off during my college years, I'd worked as a tutor within the university, and then also give grinds to people. So I was involved in the UCC Plus program, which is helping students from economically disadvantaged
Oh, wow.
areas. And I also did some work for the Disability Support Service, which is students with kind of learning difficulties with um, autism and stuff
Oh,
like
yeah.
that. So I found that like really rewarding, challenging, but also really really rewarding. So made the big decision to try and become Dr. McCarthy. So did 1 year of a PhD, which is what I have my master's in information systems research. And unfortunately, we'll kind of get to this later. My funding got reduced, which kind of forced my hand. So had a bit of a decision to make of whether to stay in Cork, move to Dublin, or move to London. So a lot of my friends had already moved to
The big smoke.
the big smoke, so to say, bit a far cry from Cork City, as you know, and Passage West especially.
Yeah.
So moved over to London in 2017 and have been here now nearly 3 years. So I work in probably one of the least sexiest jobs in the world. I'm a tax manager. Um, but yeah, I enjoy it. It's interesting. It's the good part of tax. It's not taking money away from people. It's actually
Giving them money. No, I'm joking.
well, it's so what I do kind of at a high level, and I won't bore
Yeah.
listeners with the ins and outs, is basically the UK government have a scheme that enables companies to claim back money for innovative activities that they're doing. So the company that I work with, the Accountancy Cloud, big shout out to the Accountancy Cloud. Um, they work predominantly with technology startups. So this would be within a wide variety of kind of disparate technology sectors. So legal tech, health tech, IoT, AI, machine learning, blockchain, stuff like that. So I work with those companies to claim money back from the UK government for them, so that they can, employ, hire more staff to pump back into R&D, extend out their runway for a couple of months. So yeah, that's kind of my high level story.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. Hopefully, I think the listeners anyway will have a good idea. Also, just before we continue, I should probably tell them that my accent will probably be a lot more Irish that adapts to whoever I'm speaking with. So this is going to be hilarious. It's going to go so Cork. Sure, we love it. We love it. So, Simon, we're gonna go take it back now to the kind of first event that you mentioned,
Yeah.
and it was the death of one of your friends at 17 from an ecstasy overdose.
Yeah.
That sounds rather traumatic. Do you mind just giving us a bit more detail about the kind of background of that?
Yeah, sure. So, when I was in school, I probably wasn't the best behaved of individuals. Anyone who's listening to this who knew me at school would laugh. That I'd always kind of got good grades and stuff like that. But, you know, teenagers would be teenagers, and we kind of got involved in, drinking and drugs and stuff like that. And unfortunately, so this would have been in fifth year, which would be what would fifth year be?
17.
Yeah,
Yeah.
17. So, what would be the
Oh, the
year?
year here.
Yeah.
Fifth year is AS, I think. I don't know if they've changed that now. Essentially the year before your A levels, lads.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
the UK listeners listening to that.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it'd be the year before the A levels. So yeah, went out, got some ecstasy, and unfortunately, with ecstasy, to anyone who's listening who knows anything about ecstasy, the unfortunate thing is that if you're getting pure MDMA, then it's you're pretty okay. But with ecstasy, it can be cut up with any number of illicit substances and stuff like that. And unfortunately, for my friend, he was just one of the unfortunate statistics. It was a complete absolute accident. And yeah, so that happened. He was 17 and I was 17 as well. And
And you just thought, you're going out for just a night out and
yeah, exactly.
just the same old kind of thing. And can I ask, actually, Simon, with regards to this, you mentioned, say, it's safe enough if you're having, say, pure MDMA and stuff. How safe do you think it is now? Because obviously there's been changes with things. I'm unaware with stuff like this, but I'm genuinely curious about it. How kind of safe do you think it is now with people getting drugs, and not for the kind of stating the obvious, like, telling everyone don't do drugs. It's more in the sense of people who are going taking them. So you said, he's one of the statistics. Like, what's your kind of view in that now?
Yeah, I suppose with the problem still is that within the UK and within Ireland, that because MDMA and harder drugs are still illegal, it's been pushed kind of underground. So let's say if you go to, let's say, a Portugal, or if you're in, let's say, the Netherlands, then the drugs that you're going to be getting are a lot cleaner and a
Yeah.
lot purer, which means they're actually kind of ironically enough safer to take.
Yeah.
Now, the advice I would give to people is that if you are going to be taking it, then get it from someone you trust, get it from someone who knows about drugs and has taken it numerous times, because we were still young, we were naive, and a few of us had taken ecstasy in the past, but nothing kind of we weren't exactly kind of experts at it, so to say. And yeah, just start off kind of easy, only take a half a tab or one or whatever. No, because
Yeah,
because
that's
what
true.
happens is that, and it kind of happened that night without going into too much illicit detail, that the person in question just took too much
Yeah.
for what they could handle. We were 17, we were all, we weren't grown ass men, and yeah, so
It's actually quite interesting, Simon, because I've been kind of raised in an anti-drug kind of environment, right? But I actually think I know there'll be some people listening to that going, why is he giving this sort of kind of advice? But actually, I think that's quite important, because there's going to be people, of course, you can say you're better off taking nothing, right? That's, of course, the case.
yeah.
However, there are going to be people who are just not going to listen to that advice, and they are going to take it. So I actually do think it's quite important that, you know, for that kind of audience, that they are listening to what you're saying there, because people do just go straight in, don't they? And
Yeah.
it's people, it would be wrong to think that by simply saying, okay guys, don't take any drugs, that everyone's going to listen to that, because it's definitely not the case. You've seen it at festivals, you've seen it at nights out.
Yeah.
It's always going to be the case. So for those kind of like people, I think it is important to kind of be careful if you're taking it, you just gave your advice there. You start off with smaller amounts, to be very, very careful of where you're getting it from. So yeah, I do think that's actually
Yeah,
important.
and I think it's just the nature of teenagers that, teenagers will rebel, and if we go back to, if you go back to the 80s, to the Reagans being like, oh, just say no, life isn't as black and white as that.
No, it's
And
definitely true.
especially if, let's say, you're drinking, and obviously as a teenager, if you're going drinking, your body isn't used to handling alcohol yet, and your decision making is going to be impaired. And like, especially if you're, and I know it's a bit of a cliche, but especially nowadays, like, even like I'm 30 now, this is 15 years ago, 15, 14 years ago. You know, the peer pressure thing, everyone wants to be cool. Everyone wants to be cool around their friends and to not be the person who's seen as, you know, dry or, oh, you have to go home, you know, stuff like that. Everyone wants to be kind of in that clique or that cool group. And, being honest, that was a big part of me kind of doing stuff like that was, oh, I didn't want to be seen as, oh, Simon has to go home and Simon's no fun and stuff like that. So yeah, the advice I would give is if you are going to do stuff like that, educate yourself. And we'll kind of touch on this probably later. Is I'm a massive believer in education, and to just be aware of the pitfalls and the possible repercussions. Because again, teenagers and me especially, you know, you feel you're invincible. You feel that you've got your whole life ahead of you, and that nothing bad is going to go wrong. You know, you're probably, you know, teenagers and children, you know, they're probably 99% of the time, or 9 times out of 10, you know, their first kind of brush of, unless you're extremely unlucky and some people just get dealt a really, really bad hand in life, that it's probably their grandparents is unfortunately the first time that they kind of experience death and loss and whatever.
Yeah.
And it's a little different because, well, it's very different because there's this feeling that the majority of people's grandparents are 70 or 80 or whatever. And, you know, they've lived a good, long, full life. They've had a family. They've got married. They, you know, bought a house. You know, they have grandchildren, you know, and so on. And that's, you know, that's kind of the natural order of things, if that makes sense. And when you're that young, the classic line of, it'll never happen to me. And unfortunately, it does happen. And it happened to, you know, my mate. And I didn't mean to dehumanize the situation by saying he was a statistic, but unfortunately, he was. And it's very strange because, like, my grandparents passed away when I was quite young. Well, one of them passed away before I was even born, so I never knew her. And then 2 of them passed away when I was quite young. So again, I was only 4 or 5 and didn't really understand what was going on.
Yeah.
You know, I was 4 or 5. But the reason I kind of chose this to talk about is that really kind of made me grow up, in a sense.
It must have been a huge shock.
Well, yeah. And I think one thing that really kind of stuck with me, like looking back on it now, again, this is 13 years ago, nearly, was, and I didn't really, again, you know, when you're a teenager, you don't have the insight into people that you have when you're in your 20s or your 30s, that how it affected even the teachers at our school. And these are people in their 30s and 40s and 50s, you know, it really screwed them up as well.
That's actually very true, because I think a lot of people wouldn't think of that, you know, how it's affecting not just yourself as someone that's, say, younger, but it does affect the other people in the community.
Oh, of course, yeah. And, it completely shook up, you know, I come from quite a small town, you know, Passage West is probably bigger now, but back at that time it was about 5,000 people, and everyone knows each other.
Yeah. Oh, so that's everywhere in Cork, like.
Yeah, everywhere in Cork is like that. You know, someone knows someone who knows someone who knows someone. 6 probably less than 6 degrees of separation, probably about 2.
Yeah.
So, you know, leading on from that, you know, it really did shake up a community. And looking back, you know, we probably didn't. But then again, you know, how do you handle stuff like this when you're 17? You know, I suppose my kind of way of doing it was acting out and, you know, kind of not going to school. Mom and Dad, if you hear this, I'm sorry. And stuff like that. But, you know, kind of, again, looking back at the 17-year-old me, it took me a long time to kind of deal with that. Because, you know, anyone who kind of knows me, I can be a bit emotionless and kind of cold and stuff like that. And it took me a long time to kind of get my head around that, because again, at 17, you're still a child.
Yeah.
You know, I know at 18 you can smoke, you can drink, you can gamble, you can do all these things, you can vote. But as far as I'm concerned, looking back at the 17-year-old me, still a kid.
Yeah. Figuring out the world.
Figuring out the world, exactly. And, it took me a good 8 months to fully get my head around, oh shit, he ain't coming back. And, again, anyone listening to this who has dealt with something similar, and I say this to friends of mine, even people who lose people in their 20s and so on. It happened to a friend of mine recently that one of our very good friends that she grew up with, unfortunately killed himself. And she came to me and we had a conversation about it. And I know it seems like scant consolation and, just words, but time is a great healer. And it's not that I don't think about him because, Jesus, 13 years on, he still pops into my head.
Yeah.
And there's still a part of me that's like, oh, that sucked, and he had such a full long life ahead of him. But I think that you have to give it time and let the healing process happen. And it's not that you care less, and it's not that you forget, because you don't, but you deal with it. And life has this way of throwing curveballs at you, and I'm a great believer in, it's not the good times that make a person, it's the bad. And it's how you handle those bad things, because we all see people and we all know people that have had bad things happen to them that are outside of their control. And you don't want it to define your life, and you don't want it to consume you. Exactly. I think that's a very good way of putting it, that. And especially if it's, let's say, a personal betrayal by somebody, or if someone kind of screws you over, some people, it can consume their lives, and they can just think about that nonstop, and it just leads to kind of bitterness and resentment and so on. So yeah, that would be a piece of, advice that I wish I could have given my 17-year-old self, is not let it go, but, just take the time. It does get easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Can I ask, Simon, because I presume there was you and a group of you that night. It wasn't just yourself.
Yeah.
At the time, did you and your friends feel guilty, or were you just more so kind of traumatized?
No, horribly guilty.
Yeah.
Horribly guilty. All of us did. I don't want to speak for the other people who were there. But yeah, for a long time, guilt. Why didn't we do something sooner? Why didn't we know what was up? But when it comes to stuff like this, I think a very important thing in life, and it's something I've learned, is the ability to forgive yourself.
So important.
Everybody makes mistakes. No one is on a hill perfect.
Yeah.
And again, I think that kind of ties in with the setbacks that we have in life. Some are personally inflicted, and we all make screw ups. But
it's kind of how you move on from them and deal with
exactly. And it's very important to put your hands up and apologize. And apologizing as well is a big thing, because where I'm at now, if someone apologizes to me, I think it's a huge thing, because it shows self-reflection, it shows modesty, it's
swallowing your pride a bit as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. And definitely, again, as a teenager or as a younger person, you don't want to be seen as kind of, and I don't know what it's like for women, but for men especially, it's a big thing about being a man, as in being prideful and not showing weakness is a big thing. And especially in groups of boys or groups of young men and so ever, you don't want to be seen as the weak one.
But in fact, I actually think, this is coming from a woman's perspective, but in a way, if you say what you say there, which is what a lot of men think, it actually takes a lot more strength then, doesn't it, to go off and apologize and do that for some people anyway, I would say. If they're so focused on, as you said, the pride and being strong that way.
Yeah.
Then maybe it's a different type of strength than to go off and, be a bit more vulnerable or go off and say, as you said, apologize to someone.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you hit the nail on the head there with the use of the word vulnerable, because like we both know, the rates of suicide among young men in their 20s and so on, and a lot of it, in my opinion, is not wanting to show vulnerability and not, owning up to how they feel and being able to show weakness and pride as well, and especially, you hear of cases of, let's say, young men getting into financial difficulty or, problems with, let's say, substance abuse or gambling and stuff like that. And, we all need a hand every now and then. And it's just being able to swallow your pride and say, I'm really stuck here and I need help. And talking to your friends is very important as well. And that's probably something that I only kind of clicked when I got into my 20s, was your friends are your friends for a reason. And if you can't talk to your friends, they're not your friends.
That's so true.
Yeah.
I think that's really important for people to hear, because
Yeah.
I'm sure there's going to be people out there questioning, are they my friend or what should I do? And
yeah, and I'm very blessed that I have a fantastic group of friends. But I've been in that position of hanging around in groups of people that I would call them good time friends. And when it comes to going out, drinking, if drugs are your thing, having a good time, going to parties and stuff like that, they're the best people to be around because, there's so much fun and, we have such a great time. But it's when shit hits the fan and when, as I said, these curveballs happen in life and unfortunately stuff does happen, they won't be there for you. And what you want and what I think everybody needs in their life, as independent as we are, I think as human beings, we do crave social interaction and, having people around us that we get on with and that we can trust and that we can talk to. That's very important. And, you probably don't get it right the first time. As I said, I've been in friends groups where I probably didn't act myself, and that I, looking back now in hindsight, again, hindsight being 2020, that I changed who I was to fit into these groups and who I thought they wanted me to be. And I kind of reached a point in, I'd say, probably my mid-20s where I was just like, you know what, fuck this. I'm just going to be me. And people can either like me or not like me. And there's an awful lot of people out there who don't like me. But at the same time, as I said, I have a fantastic group of friends that I know if anything happens, I can call them up and be like, I need to talk to you right now. And they will be there for me.
can I ask as well, you mentioned there, that almost temporary fix of friends, you can kind of call it, when you're out having fun. You said that you were someone that you weren't true to yourself, essentially.
Yeah.
Were you aware of that, as it was happening, or were you almost convincing yourself, no, this is who I am?
No, I knew I wasn't. I was kind of playing to their preconceptions or who they wanted me to be or whatever. Yeah, I would hope people would describe me, and I try and do it as much as I can, as being self-reflective. And that was me making a choice to basically lie to myself and to lie to other people and pretend to be this person that I wasn't. And, again, I take full responsibility for that. I knew it was wrong at the time, but especially when you grow up in, a small kind of town where everybody knows each other, you don't want to be the guy with no friends.
Yeah.
Or the girl with no friends.
I know the feeling.
Yeah, so you feel that you have to stick to the status quo, just, slide into this group of people, just pretend to be who they want you to be. But then when, let's say, you go to university or when you get out working, and especially if you move to, let's say, a larger city, like where we are right now, one of the biggest cities in the world, you can be who you want to be. And I think that's very important, is because, it kind of goes back to, people have been writing about this for years. If you go back to Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, you know what I mean? Like, as in, the man who wears two faces, after a while he forgets which one of those is the true. And you can lie to many people in this life, but you can't lie to yourself.
Yeah.
You can't run away from the mirror.
That's actually fascinating that you said that, when you came here, because I felt something similar enough. I'm very much attached to home in Ireland. Like, I think it always kind of calls you the motherland. And I love the trust kind of there, the community sense. I think it's so much better than here. But one of the things that was the big reasons I suppose I came over here was a bit like what you said. I felt like I couldn't be truly myself. I think for me, I thought it was more I was too much. I'm quite a bubbly, loud kind of character.
I would never have guessed Amy.
So, yeah, I found, like you mentioned there, here, because it's so big, there's so many different people. I found that it doesn't seem to be as, I mean, it's probably in my own head anyway, do you know what I mean? But at the same time, that's one of the things I definitely noticed. So that's interesting now to hear your kind of perspective on that as well. And but I suppose if we just go back there, you've mentioned you're coming to London, but before that, actually, if we go into your second event, you mentioned that you moved to America. And this is because you suffered from a prolonged depressive episode. So how long was this after the ecstasy overdose incident?
Yeah, so I would have moved to the US. So kind of a bit of background here. So as part of the undergrad in business information systems, you have to do a 6-month placement stint during your third year.
Right.
So I had always kind of thought about going to the US as part of this placement program. But yeah, I suppose it kind of really started. Well, I suppose, again, a bit of backstory here. I know I'm giving backstory within backstories, like Inception. I kind of grew up not really getting on with my family. I won't get into the ins and outs of it. We're just very, very different people.
Yeah,
and we always clashed.
Okay.
And that kind of then reached a head in my early 20s. And again, I put my hands up to, I went to university for 2 years doing biological and chemical sciences. I basically went a bit crazy on the alcohol. Didn't study.
Simon's top tips.
Yeah, Simon's top for the day. Study. It helps.
Do it.
Yeah, exactly. So then took a year out when working, went back into BIS, into business information systems. And kind of stuff at home had reached a head where, and I was drinking a lot and I just wasn't happy. I then gave up alcohol for a prolonged period of time. I think I was off at about a year and a half, 2 years.
Was that hard?
Personally, it wasn't hard. It was hard to socialize.
Right, okay.
And the reason being that Irish people are we have a bit of an obsession with alcohol.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely a social kind of catalyst, isn't it?
Yeah, catalyst. And especially if you're in university, all the parties revolve around alcohol. So I actually didn't find this too bad at the start of the night. What really was because I was lucky enough to have a car. So I would be the designated driver. So I drive everyone to, let's say, a house party for pre-drinks. And it was fine at the start of the night because everyone was sober. But come about 10, half 10, when everyone was heading out, because, of course, students being poor, they wanted to pre-drink as much as they can so that they didn't have to spend too much money out. And everyone was absolutely hammered and people weren't making sense. And
was that very annoying?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Being the sober person in the room and you're just like, you're not making any sense. This is just drunk talk, And I used to normally call it a night at about 11 o'clock when people were heading into a club. Because I don't know, have you ever been in a nightclub sober?
I have. I actually.
It is surreal. It's literally, it's like being on acid when the rest of the world is sober. You're sober and the rest of the world is going on and everyone is just absolutely screwed up. And it can be funny. You can see some very funny things in a nightclub if you're sober,
Yeah.
but
It's a totally different experience.
it's a totally
Yeah, I've
different
been a few
experience.
times. It's everyone seems very stupid, no offense to them. It's like
Oh yeah,
yeah, no, it's
and I know myself that I drink nowadays, and I know myself after about 4 or 5 drinks. You know, my jokes aren't funny. I'm just acting like an absolute idiot. And if you're around other drunk people, that's fine.
because it's the same humor, isn't it?
It's
Everyone's
the
not
same.
kind of
It's the same humor, but when you're the sober person, it just doesn't work. So yeah, I was doing that, and I don't know. I just for a long, long time, I was just very unhappy, and as I said, things at home kind of came to a head, so to say, and America came at the right time for me.
right.
So moved over there with a great bunch of people, and I just needed to get away, um, and kind of get out of my own head, and just it was with a group of people as well that weren't my kind of core friends group for my first 3 years in university, and just met new people, new experiences. By the way, Boston is an absolute hell of a town, and especially if you're Irish.
Yeah, I've heard. I've been to
Yeah.
New York, but I haven't been to Boston yet. So
Oh,
that's on the list.
it's one of my favorite cities in the world. It's an absolute great place to go.
Class.
So yeah, and within about 2 months over there, I kind of started dipping my toe back into the water, and I was like, okay, I think I'm now in the right headspace that I can drink again, because obviously alcohol being a depressant, if you're having negative thoughts when you're sober, you're going to have extremely negative thoughts when you're drunk. And it's not even when you're out and you're drinking, it's when you go home. And we've also, I'm sure everyone listening who's had a bad hangover has the hangover melancholy and whatnot.
Oh, I've experienced that.
Oh
really
yeah,
badly.
the alcohol blues.
Oh my goodness.
Um,
Scary though. I like I find it generally quite scary the fact that I thinking like that. But it's the classic you have the high and then you have the low, isn't it? It's like
well, yeah, because like alcohol is inherently a depressant,
yeah.
and while you're out and your adrenaline's pumping and you're dancing and you're having a great time with people, it's when you go home and you're on your own and it's just you you're locked in your own thoughts. And I don't know what it's been like for you, but every bad thing you've done, or any let's say things I shouldn't have said or things I wish I had said,
Comes to haunt you.
it comes back to haunt you and bite you in the ass, exactly. And even being sober, and I was in that headspace anyway, I was in like, okay, I'm in a lot better headspace now. Let's dip my toe back into the water, see what it's like. And yeah, I've been in a really, really, really good place ever since then. So that was 2014. Yeah, 2014. And even I came back after I was there for 6-7 months, came back into final year, and I met some of my friends who hadn't been over there, and they were like, wow, you're like a new person.
So you think it was the best thing for you?
Oh, it was one of the best things I ever did, because I just needed to get away from quite a negative environment, people being negative and stuff like that. And that's a piece of advice that I would, again, 30-year-old me looking back at 24-year-old me, is where you can be around positive people.
So important, I agree.
I give a shout out here to my friend Kev, who I lived with over in the States, and he's one of my best friends to this day. I loved living with him because he's one of the most positive people ever. Be around positive people.
Makes you happier, doesn't it?
Oh, 100%. As in, I've said this to his face, I'd live with him again in a heartbeat, because he's so positive. He's always in a good mood. He's always happy, and, not saying that it's not okay to be around people who are a little more, let's say, everyone goes through their shit.
Yeah.
And
you can be, do you find out that you can actually be there for people better now? If someone, say, came to you with something, do you find that because of, say, living with Kev, you had a change in, say, attitude and perspective, perhaps? Like, how does that kind of affected your attitude towards people, say if they came to you?
Well, I suppose I've always been a person that people come to talk about things, and I suppose the predominant reason here is that not being, extremely close with my immediate family, my friends were always the family I chose for myself.
Okay.
And within all the friends groups I've been in, probably from my early 20s up until the present day, I suppose as well, one of the few strengths that I do have is I feel that I'm not a very judgmental person. Um, when it comes to people making mistakes, and everyone has stuff going on in their lives, and as I said before, everyone does make mistakes, and I would try not to judge people for their mistakes, and people have always felt that they can come to me and talk to me and trust me to, give them the best advice they can, or be like, look, I'm going through this, can I talk about it? So that was always kind of there. Obviously, it was a bit tougher when, let's say, and this is to kind of bring it back to, when I wasn't feeling the best myself. Unfortunately, I think it's very true that when there's other stuff going on, people displace and people lash out at those closest to them. And I know I was I was not a nice person to be around, because I would be, let's say, argumentative with my friends. I'd be, just not a nice person to be around. And, again, looking back and learning from that, I should have realized this isn't right. And, I've apologized for that behavior, and I've kind of hope I've rebuilt my bridges there with people. But no, I've always kind of hoped that I would be that person that people would come and talk to, and it's so important, that. And again, I'm very lucky that I do have a group of friends that people can come and talk to me, and if they're going through traumatic stuff or if something happens to them,
And vice versa, going to them?
Yeah, it depends. Again, I suppose kind of I've always been a very independent person, and we were actually talking about this before we
Yeah.
went on air, that I'm getting there, but sometimes I can still internalize things a little bit. But I'm very lucky that the older I've gotten, I've also gained a lot of perspective,
Yeah.
which I think is very important. And that, what may seem as, in your late teens, in your early 20s, is the biggest deal in the world, actually isn't that big of a deal. And, enough stuff will happen to you in your life without making a mountain out of a molehill, if that makes sense. And to roll with the punches and just kind of take a deep breath and say, okay, that's not ideal, but in the grand scheme of things,
Is it the end of the world?
is it the end of the world? Exactly. Things could be a lot worse.
My brother used to give me that advice, actually, when I was... Sometimes you really do have to think of it like that. Do you know what I mean? The world's against me, life's unfair, and then you realise that, yeah, life is unfair, though, isn't it? And I think that's the same for everyone, but then you have to really look at the perspective and go, as I said again, thinking, when I look back, the advice I was actually given exactly was, picture your a grandmother giving advice to your grandchild. Like, when you're looking back, do you honestly think this is going to be a standout? It's like, no,
Yeah, exactly.
probably not. And that was very insightful for me. I still, there's still times we're allowed to get upset over things, we're allowed to
Of
get
course,
down
yeah.
about things, but yeah, that's
We're humans at
really,
the end of the
really
day,
insightful.
and a lot of the time we do emotionally react to things. I know it's definitely something I've worked on down through the years, is my temper, and touch wood. It's been a long time since I properly lost my temper, but it's something I've worked on. Again, just taking a deep breath and saying, "Is this really that important?" And stuff unfortunately will happen to all of us through our lives, and I am a great believer in it's how you deal with it, and it's how you roll with the punches, or to use cliches, to get back on the horse and just do your thing, so to say.
Wow. Yeah, no, that was actually really nice to hear in a way, I think, because it's a lot of people can relate to that, whether they know it or not. It's one of those things that people might look back and go, that was me, or that is me, or so yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That actually brings us on to our third event, Simon,
Yep.
which you slightly mentioned earlier.
Yep.
You lost your PhD funding, and that triggered a move to London.
Yeah.
So we've just kind of gone from you were better now coming back, you were in a different place. How did this kind of affect things?
Yeah. So again, it wasn't ideal, but you got to roll with the punches in life. You know, I'd worked my worked my ass off for a year. You know, working a couple of jobs and then writing my PhD at night and stuff like that, and not having the best social life in the world, to kind of having the rug taken from underneath me, so to say. But again, at the time, I was like, okay, I can either a couple of things can happen here. I can either bitch and moan about this for the next couple of months and just do nothing, or I can be proactive and do what I want to do, because at the end of the day, we only get one life,
Yeah.
and you know make the most of it. So at the time, I'd had a few friends in Cork, a few friends in Dublin, but a lot of my friends had moved over to London, and I'd always kind of had in my head that I wouldn't like to live over here, but there was another part of me that just said, you know what, give it a go. Go over there for a year,
See how you get on.
see how you get on. Exactly. And
I think that's an Irish phrase, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
see how you get on.
yeah, exactly. Do you know, have a Gary off that there to see what happens. And yeah, nearly 3 years later, I'm still here. So yeah, moved over. Took me a while to get a job. Again, got to the final round with a few companies. They didn't accept me, and then just life has a way of, life giveth and life taketh away. I just literally got a phone call from a recruiter. Do you want to go for an interview? Went for an interview, got the job. Then moved to my current company, where I'm at, last April, and I'm here now just over 18 months, and really liking it. Again, I know tax isn't everybody's cup of tea, but it pays the bills.
Yeah. No, that's completely fair enough. So you're here now in London, and as I say, you said you're still getting there, which is almost like the point of this podcast, really, isn't it? We're all just kind of getting there.
Yeah.
So I suppose from now, you look back and you said, obviously, these events are very, they're big pointers in your life, I suppose, and learning kind of.
Yeah.
Looking back, what have you kind of taken now? I know you've mentioned some of these things before, but for the future, you said obviously positive and stuff. What else have you kind of taken from that?
Definitely to forgive yourself. Everybody makes mistakes, and as you say, we're all getting there. We're all constantly learning. We're all, a kind of a shifting organism, so to say, as in nothing in life is perfect, and nothing will ever be perfect. And a lot of it, I think, is just acceptance of, number one, your circumstances, because a lot of stuff happens, as I said, I've said this numerous times, that you can't control, but also acceptance of who you are. And I think that's a big thing, is being comfortable in your own skin and just being yourself. And if you be yourself, I'm a great believer at that. You will surround yourself with like-minded people, with people who appreciate you for who you are, because again, if you try to be someone you're not, you're going to have people who like you for not the real you.
That's so true. Like, honestly, how are you supposed to attract the right people if they're seeing someone different?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's...
And then, and I think I've gotten better at this the older I've gotten, is just work hard, study, Study, work hard, try and be the best at what you do. And always kind of strive to be better while accepting that nobody's perfect. And yeah, just try and be the best you that you can be. And value people who value you. I think that's a big one.
Yeah, that's huge.
That be it your family, be it your friends, be it your partner, if someone like it's such a simple thing, but it's a mantra that I try and live with is someone's nice to you, be nice to them.
Yeah.
Be it if they're men, women, transgender, straight, gay, bisexual, any race, any creed, any nationality. If you're nice to me, I'm going to be nice to you. And it's as simple as that. And maybe that kind of leads back into the kind of trust thing that I'm very lucky with my friends, or even with people I meet, that, I have quite honest and open conversations like we've had today about stuff like this. And, don't judge a book by its cover. Like, try not to make snap judgments on people, because, people aren't black and white.
Yeah.
There's many shades of grey in between. I think another important thing is holding yourself and others to quite high standards.
Okay.
That if you see people that you're around acting in a way that you're kind of like, okay, that's not cool. Don't put up with second best in your life. And be it if you're unhappy in your job, if you're unhappy with, let's say, a partner, if you're unhappy in your friends group, again, it goes back to the difference between being proactive and reactive.
Yeah.
You got to be proactive, because the last thing you want to do is look back in 5 years' time and be like, what was I doing, for those 5 years? And yeah, I think a combination of all those things will kind of lead someone to being genuinely happier within their lives. And at the end of the day, we only get one, so let's make the most of it.
Wow. Advice I'm taking. On board. No, I really, honestly, I genuinely mean this. Like, thank you for kind of letting down your guard and sharing all that, because that's really important
Anytime.
advice. Round two. I think I say this in all the podcasts. Everyone needs a round two. But yeah, guys listening, I hope you've taken something from that. And I hope, Simon, that you've enjoyed your time here and had a good chat, because I certainly have.
Happy to talk anytime.